One of the greatest demands that is placed on our family, a family made up of nearly 300 children, the majority of which having special needs, is access to medical care. This week we took 3-month-old baby Gianna for a life-changing and life-saving surgery. Gianna was born with hydrocephalus, and hydrocephalus is a condition where the spinal fluid does not drain from the head, causing the head to swell to an extreme size. Without the surgery, Gianna's life would have been a short, traumatic and painful life. Thankfully, the surgery has been a success and she will be okay, and she will have a life with all of the love, care, wonder and support that this world can possibly offer. I want to thank all who are involved in our family and making what we do a reality. If you are praying for us, if you are fundraising, if you are sharing when you can, or if you are a partner, thank you. Without your love and support, our family simply could not do what it does. If you are interested in becoming a partner, then you can find out more by visiting www.sharetanzania.com/partnership. Thank you for all of the love and support, guys. Without it, lives like Gianna's would be tremendously different. God bless you all, and thank you. As with all individual humans within the story of mankind, I am just a normal man, a normal human. However, through a series of decisions and supernatural events and pulls, I have been able to hear with some degree of clarity for approximately 14 years, the voice of God. And my evidence for that, having some substance and some meaning, is that that voice asked the man sitting here speaking to come to Kilimanjaro, Tanzania, all of which is documented online, not knowing why I was coming here. And I followed in faith what I was certain was the voice of God. And we have now reached a point where we believe from our research that we are the world's largest solution for special needs children living in crisis in developing countries. A normal working class man, he is the voice of God, obeys the voice of God, and that without any education on the topic, without any planning, without any analysis or strategy, is the result of walking in faith to our living God. That is my credential. I am not garnished in the outfit of a yogi. I don't pertain to know the mysteries of life. But I have recognized that if the voice of God that leads us and animates our intelligence to be in the right location for these beautiful events to take place, if that voice is heard in the state that has been pointed at with the term enlightenment, then I can also say that any guru, any teacher who has told you that they have attained enlightenment, or they have attained God, or they have attained the supernatural capacities of Christ, any human who says that, in the eyes of the one speaking, has walked into a trap, an ego trap, an error. It does not make them bad people. We are all victim to it, I included. However, the voice of God speaks to the human organism when the one who feels it can attain such matters as the living God's presence, or awakening, or spiritual rebirth, or enlightenment, or indeed Christ. The image within inside of us who feels it can attain such topics must be absent, and as such to verbalize, I have attained God, I have attained Christ, as gurus will say, I have attained enlightenment. I believe there is a grave error there. For who can attain the realization of oneness? It is in the absence of an attainer that realization automatically configures. From that position and those credentials, I have been shown several elements of our human story. And for many, those elements are hard for acceptance into the mind. It is even hard, for narrow is the way for many to enter the frequency state whereby they are revealed to the senses of each individual. In my own life, it was a 40-day water fast that changed everything. Not many are willing to walk such a road, but when you do, the fruits are colossal. The presence of the living God becomes a permanent fixture in your life. And from that new blessed state of being, that new anointing and the presence and the voice of the Christ, the Holy Spirit, I wince and struggle to look at what I see taking place in the world. I see humanity feeling it is on the edge, on the precipice of another world war. And yet I see that very few even understand what the enemy is or what the cause of that world war will be. And the cause of that world war, in part, will be one particular religious system that we are living by within inside the collective. And that religious system is very difficult for the majority of human beings who are involved in that system to accept and become aware of as a problem. During the Israel and Iran conflict, yet again as with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, the world was poised with fear of a nuclear war or a World War III event. That fear is natural, for we do not want, most of us, war, conflict, suffering. We certainly do not want ourselves and those we love to suffer. In our hypocrisy, we will justify why others must suffer, but we never want it. And so we never want war in our family. We never want war on our doorstep. We require war, if we are to cheer for it, to be at a distance, to be abstract, which is the hypocrisy of humanity. For we know what it is to love our own, but we condition the love of somebody that's far. And we will find any number of reasons to condition that love. When Israel and Iran were exchanging blows, many people were very certain in the Western side who the evil and who the good were in this story. For some, they said Israel is the good guy and Iran is the bad guy. For others, they said Iran is the good guy and Israel is the bad guy. If both sides of the conflict are certain that the other side is bad or evil and that they are doing good, can we see our failings as Christians, as Jews, as Muslims, if we look at a conflict and we have determined through our analysis and our belief and our trauma, therefore our unforgiveness, we have determined that this party is evil and this party is good. Ultimately, what we have done is we have engaged in the knowledge of good and evil operating system, something that universally has been agreed upon by most, that humanity fell, and the result of the fall was the knowledge of good and evil. And that left an imprint in the mind of humanity that we now have a knowledge of good and evil operating system. So those on the side of Iran, in this instance, those on the side of Israel and the US at some point, have taken, on both sides of the conflict, the knowledge of good and evil operating system and determined they are evil and we are good. In determining that they are evil and we are good, the human organism can be frog-marched into a state whereby extreme emotion is capable of animating the intelligence. And that extreme emotion is born from the separation of the knowledge of good and evil, a fallen state created by Satan within inside humanity, by saying this one is evil, therefore go for it, attack them. I winced at the public uproar, which I agreed with the uproar, when Jordan Peterson, a man who has done great things for young men in this world, and young women, I'm certain, and old in both categories. But when Israel first retaliated, I believe he posted, "Give them hell, Netanyahu." This is an emotional response that is inappropriate if you wish to be somebody who is guided by the living God. And if you don't agree with me, you can at least agree with Yeshua. For if you take the teaching of Yeshua and you say the Pharisees are Israel, and you say the adulteress is Iran, what did Yeshua say? He said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Alternative language, he said, peace. I call for peace, for neither party is any more righteous or good than the other, nor is neither party any more evil than the other. And as both parties are saturated with the knowledge of good and evil operating system and all of the unfortunate blemishes that it gives to humanity, then peace is the only option. For if we don't call for peace, or he who is without sin cast the first stone, which is ultimately a guideline to lead us to call to peace, if we do not bring that forward, we will continue an endless exchange of war and suffering and pain. In among there, you have three religions. You have Christianity, you have Islam, and you have Judaism. The Zionist state is not necessarily having the favor of every Jew on the planet. Many Orthodox Jews, very serious human beings, are absolutely opposed to the state of Israel and the Zionist regime. And I, as a human organism who has been blessed with something of an altered state of consciousness, where most leave God as a whimsical notion and image that they will never be able to prove or disprove, can hear the voice of God, and with great results by following it, gives the testimonial that the living God wishes to speak to all of humanity at all times. If we look at the suffering that wars create, the causality of that suffering is demonic. it is violence, it is demonic. Now you may argue there is a time for defense in a world where consciousness has not yet become coherent and realized its nature. That is valid. But if that is true, our world leaders should literally simply say that. We feel threatened. We wish that we could remain with peace. We understand that this is not a solution. The solution is to change inwardly so that we all call for let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Let the Pharisees be Israel. Let the adulteress be Iran. Yeshua would stand between them both and say, okay, whoever's sin-free, go first. And of course, neither party can go first, for it determines that both parties are good and evil, all wrapped in one, based on the judgment of the knowledge of good and evil operating system. Therefore, the enemy is not Israel, it is not Iran, it is not the United States, it is not Judaism, it is not Islam, it is not Christianity. The religion that is leading us to war, that is leading humanity to fight one another and feed this lower ethereal energy into the claws, the grip of what we have said is Satan or the fallen angels. The religion is thought. Thought has become the religion of humanity instead of the sacred presence of the living God. And this is so hard for many people to grasp, but it is true in every way possible. It is opposed to Yeshua's teaching for any Christian to cheer for Israel. It is absolutely opposed because your religious identity has allowed you to become warm to the notion that this identity, which lives in separation from the love of God, all identities, be they structured around religion, Jesus, Allah, spirituality, any identity inside the human mind that is present in any form with any image, any paraphernalia, is a separated state from the love of God. And if it makes the decisions of animating the intelligence, it will happily celebrate the suffering of others. I'm for Israel because my Bible told me something nice about it. So I'm cheering for those guys to harm others. Whereas the persons following Islam are saying, I'm against this because they are infidels and therefore I'm cheering for Islam. Both parties are victims of a demonic game by a fallen force inside our world, the fallen angelic. And that game is as simple as follows. Those fallen beings require the lower ethereal energy of fear, of suffering, of war, of pain, of terror. They require that lower ethereal energy as they are unwilling to unify, as a better way to put it, they are in rebellion with our Creator. The rebellion creates the energetic void, which leaves them through analysis and their intelligence to say, let us fill this energetic void by taking the light of Creator that exists in all of humanity and beyond, and let us lower it into these low frequency ranges that we have been destined to fall into as we refuse in our pride and arrogance to unite with the Creator. And there we will at least be able to harvest the unintegrated light so that we ourselves, when that light is brought into these lower ethereal activities of cheering for others to be bombed, or cheering for conflict, or spreading fear, or salivating for death and war and destruction. These are the effects that take place around the world that are not in the war. In the war itself, you now have humans whose consciences see it as they kill man, woman, and child. When they go to bed at night, they know it. And they either justify it through celebrating it and becoming demonic in their own nature, or they mourn and grieve it, because they understand what they are doing is somehow opposed to the one mourning and grieving being the soul, and the mind being the one, the identity of thought being the one enacting these heinous crimes against humanity on both sides of any conflict. And as such, the battle for the fallen ones has nothing to do with Judaism, Islam, or Christianity. These are, to the fallen, useful tools if those who are engaging in the teachings and the scriptures of these faiths are not led to the presence of the living God, which is humility, which is to stand before all creation and say, "Thy will be done." And when the will comes to you, you do not disagree or agree. There is no persona in the driving seat to do so. Therefore, when Creator speaks, if you are humble, obedience proceeds. It is a state of consciousness. Of course, the moment we say, "I am humble," it's gone. And the causality is thought has said, "I have attained, I own." This is the game of thought. Thought wishes to own and attain all things. But in the absence of thought is humility. In the absence of thought is humility, and in humility God so guides the humble, the voice of God is born. So Satan looks at these human creations of human thought and says, "Wonderful. I need this lower ethereal energy. What I need is for these human beings to really embrace the knowledge of good and evil operating system as if that is the final destination of this species from which it can function." And yet Yeshua was quite clear. You can move from flesh to spirit. The knowledge of good and evil operating system relies on analysis and summing up and weighing to determine what it believes is good or evil. And the presence of the Eden consciousness, we could say, pre-fall, the Garden of Eden, Eden consciousness. That consciousness knows on a cellular level, through empathy and compassion and love, what should and should not be happening. And it is only that state of consciousness that, as with Yeshua, can say, "Pause. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Satan's plan, which is in unfolding, is to ensure that we absolutely live from the knowledge of good and evil operating system. And the details of why we are judging what is good and what is evil is completely irrelevant to the fallen. So long as the belief that that is evil is present in a human, and it doesn't come from a knowing within, the belief that that is evil will result in the intelligence animating and activating in a way that says, "Let us do what we perceive as the solution for that," which ultimately results in suffering, conflict, separation, and war. If Satan and the fallen are, which they are, feeding on our lower ethereal energy, they could not care if it's Buddhism, if it's Islam, if it's Christianity, if it's Judaism. So long as the humans following these religious structures are not awakened into the presence of the living God, they will be lured decade after decade after decade into believing that their judgment of good and evil is the final say. And that is where separation and conflict is born. For they look at others and they hold them to an accountability that is beyond the reach of their own nature. If, however, a human organism can reach that space where it becomes obvious, as we have such limited intelligence, such limited wisdom, such limited love, limited empathy, if we reach the space where the living God is able to move energetically through our entire body without or with minimal blockages or no blockages, no hang-ups psychologically of unforgiveness, trauma, no religious identity saying this is how God should be because I was told that, instead of the living God here and now showing you how it will be. If humanity can stand there, we would all stand and call, as Yeshua did, for he who was without sin cast the first stone. When you understand this, you see that every war is being fought because humans have, as a soul awareness, as a divine spark incarnate, have fallen victim to the knowledge of good and evil operating system, analyzing, summing up and weighing and determining this is good, this is evil. And off the back of that, you have now separated yourself from your fellow man, for now you are presumably morally better off than them, as very few people will put themselves on the side of evil. Never does a human say, well, I've done the analysis and it is I. It is we who are evil on this side and that's the good side, but let's keep fighting. It is a trick of the mind from the fallen nature. And that simple movement of us constantly staying away from this moment where the eternal living God can move its energy through our body to make us more loving, compassionate, and lean on its wisdom, lean on Creator's wisdom, on Creator's empathy, its guidance. We are trained out of there from childhood. This is why my children are homeschooled. In childhood, we are told, take things from your memory and in the future you will pass. And nobody ever says, right here, right now is your joy and your Creator. You are atrophy right here, right now by the movement of your mind for more than a decade as a child, or more if you go into further education. There are benefits from education, but we need an antidote. For if you educate people in that way without an antidote, they will come forward with their technological and scientific know-how, with their lack of moral guidance from the centered position where the living God is, and they will happily manufacture weapons, they will happily create wars, they will happily, as the Rothschilds said, buy stocks when there's blood on the streets. If that is the notion, why not create at some point, the enemy can say, why not create blood on the streets if that's the best time to buy the stocks? You see, it all becomes a tumbling mess because we don't awaken to the flesh as the knowledge of good and evil operating system. And this message is hard because there are pastors and preachers and so on all around the world who are involved in this knowledge of good and evil operating system, have a rigid identity, and are unwilling to say that this human being talking or others who have reached the position where they hear God has anything to share that can help and assist you to be more like Christ. And as such, they will stand in front of their church and say, pray for Israel, cheer Israel, bomb the Islamics, bomb the Muslims, bomb the Islamic regime. You will have people in that state, and they have built an entire psychological identity. And that identity has been commonly known by the philosophers and wisdom keepers of humanity for eons. The Greeks depicted it with the story of the Minotaur. The Minotaur is the bull-headed man, and you must escape the maze to avoid it. The Minotaur is your lower nature. It's that identity that wants to separate you from Christ. We are tumbling through a maze which is the knowledge of good and evil operating system. And we have religiously, collectively believed that thought and that operating system is our God. And that is the religion that is being used by other dimensional forces inside this dimension and our human story to lead us towards war. That is the religion, to see the world with constant imagery. If you see with image persistently, be it religious, be it spiritual, be it philosophical, be it political, you will never allow your senses to be ministered to by the Holy Spirit, the living God, here and now. Take away my religious terminology, The creator of all things has a voice in this reality of great love and compassion. And if you see the world with images that are religious and spiritual and scientific, if you only see images, you will always descend into a space where the higher love, the higher empathy, the higher compassion that we are incapable of, but Christ through us, our Creator through us and in us, the source code through us and in us, can manifest our intelligence to enact the will of an unconditioned love. If we see without images, that is born. Because we enter unity with creation and Creator. And here, in a perfect stillness, if I try to speak that clearly to your mind, if you do not understand it, in a perfectly still mind, the heart expands and connects with the environment and the Creator of all things. And there an exchange begins where the voice of God is heard. Now, if I go into this beautiful world and I see image, instead of allowing the senses to be merely aware of what is the surroundings, I see image of house, tree, leaves, grass. I see imagery. I don't connect to it, for I just see the word. And that becomes a still, sterile, dead state of consciousness. If you then reflect that into the topic of God, there are those who have endless images of God and know nothing, not even for one moment of their day, know nothing of God's love and presence. For the images are so persistent and so frequent and so many that it's impossible. It is absolutely impossible for them to be, as the organism and soul they are, not the identity, to be a vessel that is animated by the source code of all creation. It is impossible, for the source code comes in with instruction, but the mind says to the instruction which is coming from God, my image of God doesn't sort of match that, or my image of God is far more comfortable than that. And many people therefore don't know God. If the image is there, if the image is present, you will have people who say, I can't do that as I have no money, and yet God has told them to do it. So what has occurred? As they are living from imagery and not the promise of a living God communicating with them, they make money, in that example, the God of their situation. Let he who is without sin. How do we get humanity to collectively embrace that? That's the question. And therefore the reality is, the reason we are walking into a world war, or at risk of it, is that the lower astral beings, the fallen angels, are sitting quietly, deceptively, in the eaves, as it were, in the background, and they don't care what religious story you are telling yourself or others. If it doesn't make a human elevate their awareness, look and say, this knowledge of good and evil operating system is of no good. And the scripture teaches that. It tells you don't walk by sight. It tells you walk by faith. Faith is blind trust in the voice and guidance of the living God. Sight is looking and potentially hearing it and analyzing yourself out of doing what God has asked. The enemy is cackling because we, collectively, do not talk about this. We have not taught our children this, and we have built a rigid identity that says, no, I'm right here. It's good that I analyzed as I did and decided that's good and that's evil, and now I'm cheering for war and suffering and children to die and men and women to die and dogs to die and pets to die. I'm cheering for all of that because I've done my analysis. Well, your actions are evil. Cheering for the death of other people instead of calling for peace is in of itself demonic. Being the one who says, right, I declare war, is in and of itself demonic. And again, I reiterate, yes, there may come a time where a nation is threatened by another as their consciousness hasn't awoken. But if we were in a good position, if we had true leaders who were with the living God, they would speak as I speak. I guarantee it. They would say, unfortunately, we must, because these guys haven't quite awakened into their true self, and nor have many of you, but we're getting there, but they haven't. And they just want to indulge in violence, and so a time has come to protect ourselves. But please, nobody get lost in this. Please, no one get lost in this narrative, for this is exactly what Satan wants for humanity. To try to annihilate beliefs and thoughts by killing the humans that have adopted the beliefs and thoughts from other humans. The beliefs and thoughts driving the people to have the conflict and the war. You can't eradicate a thought by killing the vessel that holds it. You can only train the human organisms to not identify with those thoughts, and there the regimes collapse, there the wars collapse, and there the religion of thought organizing the entire planet falls away. And when that falls away, the sacred begins to organize the planet. And our species would look very different. We'd look like something from a sci-fi movie. For our politicians would sit around in a round circle as nominated leaders, and they would sit in silence until coherence collectively has appeared between them on topics and decisions about the direction of humanity. But as they do not sit in silence, the very exchange of this linear conversation system negates the presence of the living God, which is outside of time, by using a communication system that's start-stop, and in doing so emphasizes the identity based in thought, which is built by the knowledge and good and evil operating system, and we continue to manifest a good and evil operating system civilization that at its heart, at its foundation, at best gets whispers and glimpses of the sacred. For the majority of the means by which we are organizing it are all based on sight and thought, and not a loving God and its guidance. And if you say that's impossible, we currently are guardian to hundreds of special needs children, employing over 270 people, and none of that was strategized or planned or organized. It all came through the living God moving, and the organism and others around it obeying. Therefore, the sacred organized and created what it is that we do. And the sacred is not organizing and creating civilization as such, because the very systems we rely on to create it completely negate anything that I reference of stillness and rebirth and awakening and the living God. People merely say, yeah, I love God. Right, back to analysis and back to think tanks, and all the while the divine empathy and compassion that we all yearn for is not made manifest in the intelligence of our leaders and those who cheer for the wars, for they are lost, or they have made friends with the knowledge of good and evil operating system. Therefore, Israel is not good or evil. Iran is not good or evil. America is not good or evil. They are all things. But as soon as someone judges them as such, you create separation between you and they, and you start the conflict. But if you stand in the consciousness Yeshua tried to walk you toward, and I hope, even if it's one human being among you, I have helped someone to grasp and see what I'm referencing, then collectively we would simply all, from fighter pilot to soldier to terrorist to world leaders to the public who have lost people and suffer with trauma, would all collectively enter that state and say, Israel, you're the adulteress here, and Iran, you're the Pharisees. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. What's the implications here? Peace. From peace and forgiveness, let us see if God can reach in and organize humanity. I shall leave it there. God bless you all. I love you all.